Well, hello, and welcome to Tolt Studio. I'm Kimberly Agbayani, the operations manager for Tolt Yarn and Wool. Tolt Studio is an education space, a space where we can connect with you every month with special guests, teachers, designers, creators, and community voices to further the enrichment of your craft and yourself. Tonight, we're thrilled to welcome Jacqueline Cieslak, whose knitting designs are compelling, and through her activism has increased awareness about inclusivity and pattern design, and has been part of an industry shift in terms of standards. She's an experienced instructor, drawing on her time in academia, and we're so happy she's with us tonight. So I'm going to hand it over to Jackie.
Hi, everyone. I am so excited to be here. Okay, I see people are still entering. Holy wow, this is a lot of people. Thank you all so much for joining me. I've been wanting to teach my online classes and have not managed the last few months because my book just kept taking more out of me than I expected, but it is to the presses, and it's just really a relief to get to connect with people again and think about teaching again. So excited to be diving back into that. So thank you so much to Tolt for this opportunity. Okay, so as a teacher, I prefer a lot of interaction with students, and that's more difficult in a format like this, obviously. But it is my goal to be able to have some really quality question and answer time. So I have prepared a presentation. But please hang on to your questions as I go through, because I really would like to be able to interact with you all. Okay, so I'm going to start by attempting to screen share, which is more daunting when there are 183 people watching me attempt it. Okay, are we good? Can everybody see? Okay. So I'm going to be talking today about planning a capsule wardrobe to honor your body. And the images and the ideas that I'm working with here are all things from my upcoming book with Pom Pom Press, which will be available for pre-order, I believe, at the end of this month. So that's really exciting for me and hopefully for all of you. Yeah, that's the images you're going to be seeing today. Okay, so what do I mean when I say planning a capsule wardrobe to honor your body? The capsule wardrobe concept is something that I sort of fell into accidentally as a teaching tool. And I think that a lot of the resources that are out there don't have a sort of particular focus on the things that matter to me about honoring how you feel in your own comfort level with clothes. So my focus is specifically on those things. And part of what I hope to impart to you today isn't so much guidelines and how to, as it is a little bit of inspiration and a spark for you to think about creating, building, curating your own wardrobe. So I am a knitter and I am a sewist, and I am a knitting pattern designer, and I am, I feel like I can actually say this in the present tense now, I am a sewing designer because my first sewing pattern is on its way to print. So that's very exciting. So the pictures and the things that I'm going to show you today have to do with both knitting patterns and sewing patterns. But I actually think these concepts are relevant even if you're not a maker. I'm assuming that since you're at the Tolt Studio, you're a maker. But even if you weren't, oh, does anybody see do you, sorry, there are some lines on my screen. Are those coming from me? Did I draw blue lines on my screen? Does anybody else see that? Okay, sorry, there's something funky going on. Okay. Sorry, folks. Let me see. Okay, I see blue lines on my screen. I don't know why. If anybody else sees those, I'm just gonna reshare. Hang on just a second. Okay. I don't know where that came from. Okay. So here we are. We're ready to start with our capsule wardrobe. Okay. So I'm going to start with some ground rules. If you've ever taken a class with me, you've heard these ground rules before. But anytime that I engage in a group in like a public forum where there's a possibility that people are going to be interacting and asking me questions, I have some ground rules that I actually sort of invite you to take, not just in this class, but in general. But, you know, like, do with them what you will. So my basic ground rules are that a body positive approach to making is an approach that that assumes that you are making for the body that you live in today. So what that means is that, especially when you are in a space where other people are present, it's really important to not make comments that are self-derogatory, because when you say something about your own body, you're talking about the other bodies in the room, right? So it's really important that you don't say things that other people will hear and think, oh, does that apply to my body? Am I also bad in this way, right? So no self-derogatory comments. And generally, I just ask students in my classes to maintain body neutral language and to not reference body changes. It can be triggering and difficult if somebody says something like, oh, my body has just changed in this way, and I'm really excited to make a new wardrobe for it, because then people are left wondering, well, my body hasn't changed in this way, right? So to approach it with body neutrality as like the guiding ethos for any language that we use. I ask my students to do that. I ask them to do that for the comfort of everybody in the room. And like, we don't need to name those ideas and give them power, right? There's also that element of it. Okay. Along those lines, I also, again, whenever there's a public forum and I will be engaging with people, it's really important to me that this is an inclusive space, that this is an anti-racist space, that this is a space where like comments, intentional or unintentional comments that make folks feel unwelcome will not be tolerated. So I'm sure that Tolt is with me in those values, and I'm grateful to them for like maintaining this as a space that is safe for participants. So, okay. Okay, so what even is a capsule wardrobe? This concept is so trendy. It is all over the internet. It is all over Instagram. I'm seeing like people post about it everywhere who, like, as far as I know, have a new outfit every day. And I'm like, this is not really a capsule wardrobe. So what is the concept? The basic idea of a capsule wardrobe is that it's not very many pieces. So generally, I would say if there's like a soft rule, no more than 10 pieces. And for some people that includes shoes and like, it doesn't usually include accessories like shawls, you know, but like if you have like 10 pieces and you supplement with 20 shawls, you're probably not adhering to the value of a capsule wardrobe, right? But the idea is a minimal number of pieces that can all be combined in different ways to create different looks. So the sort of the guiding ethos is to maximize a minimalist wardrobe by being intentional about like what you choose to add to your wardrobe. Now, I am not a minimalist by any stretch. I think that there can be a lot of value in like sort of creating and crafting in all kinds of directions, and I don't know that it's not something that I subscribe to inherently. I think that the capsule wardrobe can be really helpful as an intellectual exercise. It can be really helpful if you are like trying to think about fun ways to experiment with your clothes. I also think that the capsule wardrobe can be practical. So for example, when I had my like West Coast tour planned last spring that got canceled because of COVID, the tour that would have brought me to Tolt, one of the things that I was planning to do in the months leading up to that was to do a blog post about planning my wardrobe, because it was going to be like almost 4 weeks that I was going to be traveling, right? And so the idea that I would have only 10 pieces, especially because a capsule wardrobe can be really practical if you are a fat person. fat is my preferred descriptor for myself as a person who inhabits a body with a 54, 55-inch bust. So if you are a fat person and you're traveling, my clothing takes up a lot more physical space than somebody with a bust size that's half my circumference, right? And so it's really practical to have a carefully, mindfully curated wardrobe because I get more room in my suitcase, right? So a capsule wardrobe can be really helpful in like pragmatic if you're traveling, if you're a person who like is working and you don't want to be thinking as much about like what you're wearing day to day as a business person, right? There are all sorts of reasons. So I think when I teach my classes, I encourage students to like take what is useful to them in the capsule wardrobe concept and run with it and leave what isn't. So it's more about like understanding that there is this like creatively productive way of engaging with clothes and combinations of clothes than it is about creating strict rules about how you put pieces together. Does that make sense? Okay. Let's see, our next one. Okay, so I'm gonna give you sort of like 5-ish guidelines, gentle guidelines. These are like things that I think can maybe be helpful for starting to think about a capsule wardrobe. So the first one is to employ productive limitations. So what do I mean by that? I said earlier 10 pieces is sort of like the golden standard for a capsule wardrobe. There are different bloggers over time who have like done that in different creative ways. So there was, I want to say it was the Style Bee who like, I felt like was one of the people who reintroduced the concept in a way that people caught onto on like Instagram and in social media. And she had something that she called the 10 by 10 by 10 challenge, which was like 10 pieces over 10 days in 10 different ways, right? Again, these are sort of intellectual, creative exercises that can be helpful. Other things, other productive limitations that I suggest to people, again, to take what they find useful and leave what they don't. One of them is to say that any piece you add should work with at least 3 other pieces in the collection. And this is where things can get really interesting because you start putting together pieces you maybe didn't realize could go together. One of the people who I follow most closely and admire the most when it comes to, she calls it a mindful wardrobe, is Meg McElwee of Sew Liberated. She's a sewing pattern designer. And she is like, one of the things that she does masterfully is she is constantly styling cute smock dresses over pants. And it's so good. It looks so cute. And I think we have this assumption that if you have a dress, it's like a complete outfit. And like, maybe it is, and that's great. And then sometimes maybe it can like also be part of a bigger outfit, right? And so if you have that guideline in your head that each piece has to go with 3 other pieces, it sometimes forces you to put together combinations that you otherwise thought were inaccessible, right? Okay. Just checking my notes. Okay. So my next piece of advice is to recognize and prioritize comfort. When I talk about comfort in my classes, I like to distinguish between 2 types of comfort. I like to distinguish between physical comfort and a kind of like comfort that is really in our heads. It's not quite right to call it psychological comfort, but like the idea that there's the comfort that is how we feel physically in our body. Like, am I wearing something that is constricting and therefore makes me feel sick? Am I wearing something that is too loose and makes me feel insecure? Am I wearing something, and I mean like physically insecure about like how our body moves, right? And then this comfort that's in our head that's about, am I wearing something that changes how I feel about how I think others are perceiving me, right? So I think about this a lot, particularly with my background as a fat person and like what it has meant for me to change what I thought I could wear on my body and what I thought was like how people were perceiving me and the things that I was wearing, right? So I mention these two types of comfort because I think it can be really helpful in terms of like evaluating what we already have in our closet to recognize when we're prioritizing one type of comfort over another. And you would think, because I'm up here with this body positive approach, right, that I would be saying to always prioritize the physical comfort. But I don't actually think that that's true. I think that for some people, there's sort of the comfort that they feel and how others perceive them can actually be a matter of safety, right? I'm thinking especially about like gender presentation and what it means to how others read or interpret your gender and the extent to which it conforms to their expectations, right? And what that can mean for people, especially in marginalized gender identities, right? But it can help us to recognize, when is it that I'm making the decision? When is it worth it to be physically uncomfortable, right? When is it that I'm making a decision where I'm prioritizing one type of comfort over another, right? Some examples from my life is that I like don't ever wear anything that is tight around my abdomen, period. My body is such that when I sit down, my circumference grows quite a lot, right? So if you're a person who lives, especially in a plus size body, you may have noticed experientially, it's maybe not ever been pointed out to you like specifically consciously, but that the circumference of your hips or your belly when you're standing is smaller than that circumference when you sit by quite a lot. It can grow by quite a lot, right? And I stand up and sit down and stand up and sit down all day. I'm not going to spend all day doing one or the other. And the idea of something that's really constricting around my middle is it's not comfortable to me. It's not something that I love. But like another example that's sort of that's very different from that is that especially when it's hot, I have a really hard time with my skin touching my other skin. So I'm not a person who likes droopy armholes, for example. My physical comfort is that I like my arm side to be relatively fitted on a sweater or a sewn piece because I don't love the sensation of my skin touching my other skin. So like recognizing and knowing that there's sometimes comfort in having something that's fitted and there's sometimes comfort in having something that's a bit looser. So these are all questions that in the capsule wardrobe class, I encourage students to think about when they're like beginning to evaluate what they already have in their closet and what they might add, right? Because it can be really helpful to be mindful about why it is that we like some things and why we don't like other things, right? Okay. Okay, my next tip, number 3, is to layer vertically. This is where you're getting some real sneak previews from my book. So I love to talk about styling in terms of how clothes cut the body vertically, which to me is like it's a different approach. I detest approaches that talk about like what is flattering for your figure. Like if we could throw all that out the window and never return to it, that would be great. Like, I don't think that ever served us. We maybe had an idea in our heads that it served us, right? It maybe like brought us some comfort to think that we could dress a way that would help us conform to beauty standards in one way or another. But it really hasn't been serving us in terms of our relationship to ourselves and our clothes, right? So what I mean by layering vertically is that I love thinking about how very subtle things like hemlines and necklines layer in ways that are visual, right? So if you look at the 3 examples that I have here, and you'll notice that there are pieces that carry over across the different shots, right? So we have the first 2 photos from the left, right? Both have the tunic that's like a tencel. It's a really light drapey tencel. And then the last piece and the first piece both have the long skirt, right? But they're creating very different looks because of how they're cutting the body, right? So thinking about the fact that the tunic is a little bit longer than the vest, and layering it over the skirt, which creates more length down, right? And I'm a huge fan of necklines that peep out under other necklines. So you see that really here with the tunic neckline under the vest and under the pullover in the second photo. And then in the final photo, I really I have always really enjoyed layering like cropped tanks under cropped sweaters where there's like 1 or 2 inches of difference. And when you have a cardigan, it's even more interesting because you have this extra space in the front, right? And so in this case, the crop top underneath is actually a little bit shorter than the cardigan, which I think is a really cute look too. So I think it's a different way of like thinking about layering than we normally. It's not just about like, do these pieces match or do they go together, right? It's like, what is the visual interest that I can create in the body if I cut it in these different ways? And that's really fun for me as a designer. Okay. Number 4, seek and create inspiration. I love doing these little sketches. I'm hoping to do more this year and share more this year. For these, I used the My Body Model Croquis by Erica. It's just mybodymodel.com is the website. And actually, if you want to get your own, I have a discount code that I can share with you all. It's just Jackie10. Jackie spelled J8. We can share it afterward. But the way that the My Body Model Croquis works is that you can create a little drawing, a little figure. You enter your measurements into this online web app and it spits out a little fashion croquis that is an exact reflection of your proportions and your measurements. So I will often trace mine onto pages like I did here and then sketch over it so that I can keep it in my notebook. It can be really helpful to like visually see what you are thinking about putting on your body and the different like combinations that you can use. For me, this is really just like what inspires you. Does it inspire you to have like cute little fabric swatches that you can put up on a pin board? Is it helpful to be able to see all of these little pieces? In the capsule wardrobe workshop, we spend most of the workshop working on little sketches on tracing paper. You have your little croquis, you make little sketches on tracing paper, and then people play with different outfit combinations and give each other feedback and come up with pattern ideas, which is like to me, that's the meat of that workshop. It's really fun. So thinking about like whatever you can do to create your own inspiration. And also, I think when I say seek inspiration, I'm also talking about connecting with other makers. A huge part of my process and my inspiration comes from like connecting with, so the woman who owns the yarn shop here where I live is the woman who first inspired me to sew because she made her own clothes. And like being able to talk through ideas with her and see what she's making. I have friends that I've made through Instagram who are very dear to me, who I'm constantly sharing ideas and tips with, right? And I think that that's just, there's no substitute for that kind of community. I also think that Instagram can be a really powerful tool for finding bodies and aesthetics and styles that really resonate with you and like what matters to you. Especially if you are a person who is unaccustomed to seeing themselves and their identities represented in like mainstream marketing, finding people, Instagram is a great tool for this, but there are other places. Finding people who share your intersections, who are inspiring and interesting to you. There's no substitute for that. It is so meaningful. My Instagram feed for the last 4 or 5 years has just been like predominantly fat bodies. And that has made a world of difference in how I think about what clothing can even look like on a fat body, right? A drop shoulder, which is like, my design Rift is a drop shoulder. It's just a tee. It's basically like a box. I'm not sure how how technical we are with the terms here. But a drop shoulder looks really different on a fat body than it does on a body where the shoulder proportion and the bust circumference is different. So on a smaller body, right? And like for me, I love the way a drop shoulder hangs on a fat body. I love the sort of way that it cuts the arms in proportion to the shoulders, but it's different than how it looks on a smaller body. And I think like learning to love and appreciate those details, you can really only do that by inundating your world with those images. Okay, I'm mindful of the time. I know I'm getting, said I was gonna try to not talk for so long. Okay, so my final little piece for you all is to have fun, which is seems frivolous, but you know, especially I would say especially as women, or especially as people who if like you live in a world where you feel that like fashion is something that has been inaccessible to you for various reasons, right? Doing something like this can be really, really powerful. It can really like change how we relate to our own sort of enthusiasm about getting dressed in the morning. But it also, to me, is like a little bit of a, to me, this is also like a gentle reminder to not take it too seriously. I think that learning to make your own clothes and like learning to be cognizant and mindful of how you feel in the pieces you put on your body it's not easy, and it's not a process that's going to happen overnight. It's going to take a lot of time, and it means that you're going to make things that you're going to hate. You're going to have clothes that you hate, and you know, that's part of the process too. You learn something from those things too. So you know, have a community that you can share your hand-me-downs with, especially if you end up not wearing them at all, and just have fun with it. So that is it from the lecture portion of my evening here.
All right. Okay, so we can start the Q&A time. And there were actually a couple of questions that came up while you were talking. So I'll bring them back up. One question was, how do you commit to a minimal wardrobe as a designer when by nature of your work, you're going to keep having more and more sweaters or more garments?
That's a great question. Well, okay. I mean, the first answer is that I'm not a minimalist, so I haven't committed to that. Is one of the answers. The other answer is that I do wear all of my stuff. I wear almost everything. It's been like I'm doing everything I can right now to not wear all the pieces from the book, because I feel, although I am wearing one today, it's like it's a special occasion. I can wear, this is actually the same dress that's in the photo there. It's the Wolfric dress. But I have a couple of answers to that. I think that one thing is that I don't know if my mom is on this call, but I'm going to put her on the spot a little bit here. She, after she watched my Knit Stars class in the fall, she called me and she was like, Jackie, I'm giving away my Ursa. And I was like, oh, and she was like, I don't wear it. It is too cropped for me. I want to make something else. So I'm giving it away because I watched your Knit Stars class and you told me that if there are things that don't serve me in my closet anymore, I shouldn't have them. And I'm just not wearing it. And I was like, okay, I can get behind that, Mom. So I think, I do think that like the sort of tendency to hang on to things, I have seen designers who have done like de-stashes, something that I have thought maybe I will do at some point in the future. I did that earlier in the spring, like in last May, I think. I did I have an account, Shop Jackie's Closet on Instagram, that I've only used the once. So like, don't go follow it. You're not going to get all my clothes yet. But I de-stashed a lot of clothes. So there are things that you can do. I also think that, I'm sorry, this is a long answer, but I think it's an important question because one of the things that I didn't talk about is that a capsule wardrobe can actually be like a particular focus on sustainability as well, right? You can have this focus on like trying to dress yourself in a way that runs counter to the kind of rampant consumerism of fast fashion and of, frankly, sometimes our industry, right? With the sort of like overproduction of new patterns all the time, right? And with that in mind, I think that as a designer, one of the things that I'm trying to do this year that I'd really like to do is focus on like styling and capsule wardrobe classes and like that sort of the project of making and the marketing that surrounds that, and to turn my focus to that more than creating new patterns in the next couple of months, right? So I do think there's a way in which like you can, as a designer, I think you can think about like how you can shift your practice to ways that reflect your values. And if one of your values, one of the things that you want to try to do is to not encourage that sort of like the frenzy for the new patterns all the time, right? That is something that is certainly achievable for designers.
Right. There was a request if we could close the share screen.
Oh yeah.
So
yes, let's do that.
You can see your beautiful face. Well, that was your beautiful face was there too. But and so the next question that I was going to come to was, you mentioned croquis, and someone asked what it was, and then there was an answer, but the answer was incomplete. So I wanted to provide you an opportunity to say what a croquis is in this context.
Yeah. Okay. So if you've ever seen like traditional fashion sketches, and they're like those skeletal figures that like don't look like any real humans ever have looked, right? Like skeletal figures that have dresses drawn on them, right? That's a croquis. That's a fashion croquis. It just means it's just like a sketch of a body that is proportionally relevant to the designer, which like begs the question why were designers using those like skeletal creatures for years. So the croquis through my body model are like mathematically accurate proportional representations of your body, and it's like it literally looks like that picture that I showed that had the little watercolor images on them. That's a croquis.
Right, perfect. So there was a question about where the patterns, like the beautiful, there was a lot of comments about the vest, and I was just going to clarify again, if anybody missed it, it will be in the new pom-pom book that'll be available here soon. There'll be pre-orders coming up toward the end of the month.
Yeah.
There's also, I love your hairband and would love to know how to do it or make it.
It's very, I mean, I can do it on camera for y'all right now if you want. It's really simple. It's I embarrass myself by this. It's like it's a bandana. It's a bandana. This one I think is from Scarf Shop, which is like, I think it's based in the Midwest, and they do all of their own dyeing. They make beautiful scarves and they make the best socks. I love them. It's a really cool company. So I sort of roll it up like this, and then I put it behind my head like this. And then I put it here like this. So the two pieces are crossed. See that? Okay, and then I cross them like this. And then I take these two ends here and I tuck them in.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's very easy. I think that actually I've gotten more and more into wearing headbands as I've like dealt with various like hormone hair things that have like changed the composition and the texture and the thickness of my hair. And the main tip that I can give you is to not tie them too tightly. I think that there is a tendency when you first start wearing little like cute head things to like really tie them tightly, and A, they can give you a headache, and B, they slip off. If it's too tight, it'll like want to move forward or backward. So that's it.
Great. There's also a question about finding mannequins like in all different sizes.
Oh, we're talking about dress forms, right? Like physical mannequins.
Like a dress form is what they meant. Yeah.
I have not owned a yarn shop, so I don't know that I can answer that question. I do know that U Fibers, where I work in Charlottesville, has a dress form in my size that she ordered a couple years ago for me, which like, shout out Darren, she's the best. So I do know there is a mannequin, there's a dress form company called Beatrice Forms that I want to say is based in You know what? I don't know where they're based, so I'm not going to say. But they will make a dress form to your measurements, which is not helpful necessarily for shops, but for makers, they're quite pricey. But like, oh my goodness, do I want one? And if you are somebody who has that to invest in your making career, in your making hobby, like by all means, I think those are really, really cool. And there are, yeah, the mannequin maker who make it in our size. It's Beatrice Forms, Beatrice, Beatrice Forms. That is the one that I covet.
That's awesome. Yeah, for standard dress forms, you can literally just go online and search for them. They're quite available in lots in a broad range. So the next one was any suggestions for choosing colors? And I'm presuming this means like within a capsule wardrobe. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's actually one of the things I left out today. I don't subscribe to like any of the rules when it comes to any of this stuff, anything about fashion or styling or design. I hate all the rules. By that I mean like things like, oh, are you in autumn or you are summer or whatever? No, like whatever, wear what you like, what feels good to you, what like makes your you see it and makes your heart throb. Like those are the colors you should wear. One of the things that I do talk about in my class that I think has been helpful to me is the distinction between value and hue. So value is the intensity of the shade of a color. So like something can be lighter or darker in value. And hue is like the color of a color. So when you see a color and you identify it as that's green, what you're identifying is hue, right? But if you say like that's light green or dark green, you're talking about value. So the reason that I make that distinction, and actually you saw that a little bit in the pieces that I showed you, some of the sneak previews from my book, is because I really love putting together pieces where like you have slight value shifts between the same color, right? So layering something that's like a little bit lighter or a little bit darker over something that's in the same color family. I also think that, monochrome is having a moment. So it can be really fun to play with that in terms of value. So like understanding that distinction. I also think that especially when I used to teach knitting classes in person at the shop, and I taught a colorwork class for years, a stranded colorwork class, and understanding the difference between hue and value is really helpful when picking colors for colorwork, because sometimes people will put together 3 very different colors, 3 different hues, and they think that they're going to have like this thing that pops because they're all different colors, and then the final thing ends up looking really muddy because they're all the same value. You can tell if colors are all the same value by taking a photo on your phone and putting it in grayscale. Things aren't going to pop if they don't have value differences, right? So I love to do that. I love to put like a pop of color that's a really different value from the other things. Like I have a mustard scarf that I'm constantly putting on top of like really muted colors because it's just like, it's so bold and strong.
The next one was, Jackie, can you discuss fast fashion versus slow, considering affordability and ethical production of clothing?
Oh my God. We need another Tolt Studio. Holy crap. Okay, so to make sure that everybody who's here understands these terms. So fast fashion refers to clothing that is produced under exploitative labor practices with the intention of creating quantity in an amount that can be sold and marketed really fast for high profit. So it means creating pieces in a way that is environmentally and socially like not sustainable, very exploitative, and selling a lot of them again and again, right? So like marketing that is intended to increase impulse buying. So like fashion bloggers who like are posting every single week and they're never wearing the same thing, right? That would be sort of the epitome of fast fashion, right? Slow fashion, the idea is to sort of recognize that like there is labor that goes into the clothing that we wear, even fast fashion, right? Even fast fashion is produced by hand by people in factories. And slow fashion recognizes that like taking a moment to like owning pieces that last longer and that you pay more for is less exploitative, right? That's sort of, I think, at the root of it. The reason that it can be really tricky is because the sort of slow fashion is having a moment in which it is really trendy as well, which I think it can be tricky because slow fashion is a lot more expensive by its nature. And so that excludes a lot of people. I think that there are, I haven't addressed your question, I've just explained it. So, okay, I think there are a couple ways to go about this. First, I think understanding, perhaps I perhaps would say I prefer the term ethical fashion, right? Because it encompasses a broader spectrum, and it understands that like when we are evaluating whether or not something is ethical, we cannot just be looking at we can't just be looking at the labor practices that went into producing it, for example. We also need to be looking at, I think of like the example that I think of a lot is Universal Standard, which is a company that like, it's a complicated company, but it's a company that has an incredible size range. It's a company that like started out by offering many more sizes and better representation than Lane Bryant, right? Which like actually isn't very inclusive. And so I think I think the way to approach this is just to like think about it from all angles. It is never, it's never straightforward. It's not black and white. Yeah, I haven't really answered your question, just to say that it's tricky. There are some influencers in the slow fashion world who I highly recommend, who talk a lot about this stuff and all of its nuances, and they all have Patreons that you can support to learn more about. One of them is Aja Barber. I will type her username in here. Another one, wait, it's not allowing me to type. Hang on. Can somebody just put Aja's profile, her link in there? Aja Barber. Marielle Elizabeth is another one. Style is Style is another one. I think like following people who spend all their time really thinking about this, and I think that can be really be really helpful. So Aja Barber, Marielle Elizabeth, and the username I'm thinking of, Style, Lydia is her name, is their name.
Yeah. There's a couple questions that have come together, and I'm going to kind of collate them a bit. So there was a question about how you, as an anthropologist, cultural anthropologist, how did it influence the book you just wrote? And there have been a couple questions about the title of the book, which actually I don't think has been shared yet.
It hasn't, and you know, I have my meeting with Pom Pom tomorrow to discuss the marketing, so I'm not going to tell you all today. I'm going to be very shy about it. I don't know when we're announcing the title, but today is not that day. So all I can tell you is to subscribe to my newsletter, follow my Instagram, do the same for Pom Pom, and you will be the first to know. I'm sure Tolt will tell you too when it's out.
We will.
Cultural anthropology. So yeah, my background as an anthropologist, I don't have any formal training in fashion design. I do have formal training in anthropology, and it informs my work, because anthropology at its best, which it frequently is not at, but at its best, I think anthropology provides a like critical lens for understanding that many of the things that we value, the world that we live in, the sort of social structures that we live within, that these things are not inherent. They're not natural. They're not things that have to be the way that they are. And so if that's the case, there is potential to change them. And that, as an anthropologist, that has always informed my perspective. And so when I set out to design and started thinking about like what was even possible for me, when I first started designing, I was pretty convinced that I wasn't going to be able to model my own pieces if I really wanted to design. That turns out is not the case. It turns out that my pieces do much better when I model them myself. And I think that a huge part of that is that there's, there's like a personal energy and commitment that I bring that I think is true for not all designers, for some, right? For some designers, and being able to really control that and own that in my own photos has been important to me. And I really do, I credit anthropology with the sort of intellectual tools to help me get over the hump of thinking that there were things that I couldn't do as a fat woman. And I would say also as like an educator, as a person who's always thinking about how people learn and how they like relate to the like sort of potential transformations that come with learning new things, right? Anthropology gave me those tools. And I bring them to my pattern writing as well. When I think about like, what are the fit issues that people often face, and why sort of historically in the industry have we assumed that those can't be addressed in pattern writing, and how can I tackle that? So yeah, a good amount of credit to anthropology. Again, when it's at its best.
I 100% love that. That's amazing. So there was a comment right toward the bottom, and I'll scroll back up to get it. But Robin says that she loves that you model your own designs.
Thank you.
Yes. And so the one I was coming back to was, how do you avoid feeling overwhelmed by all the inspiration available to us as makers? Or rather, how do you find balance there from you?
That's an interesting question. I think I think I have gotten more and more particular, and I think that this is just, I think that this happens to, I don't know. I'm very particular about like what I sort of have in my space and what I want in my designs and in my aesthetic. And so I sometimes, I don't know that I feel overwhelmed, because I feel like a huge part of design for me is like carving out a little bit of a niche that I like continue to sort of make more and more specific and wedge away at. I also think that, you know what does overwhelm me in the design process? I'm overwhelmed by not having limitations. So I said at the beginning when I was like talking about the capsule wardrobe concept, right? I was like bringing it full circle. Talking about the capsule wardrobe concept, and I said to employ productive limitations, that can be really helpful, right? As a designer, I find it so much easier to design garments than to design shawls, because a shawl can be anything, and I don't know where to begin. I'm just like, I don't know what to do with it. I don't know what to do with it. And the sort of limit of clothing to fit a body, the thing that inspires and interests me is how clothes fit bodies, and like how different, like I said, different outfits can like cut the body vertically in different ways. And that's an approach that like, when you are designing for bodies, what you're basically trying to do is like, you have your starting point. The starting point is the proportions of the human body, right? Like taking that and then going out from there in different ways, and thinking about like, oh, if I have a more oversized sleeve in this one, or if the ease is different in this part, that's my design process. It really starts with bodies.
Right. It reminds me that you did that whole project where people submitted to you measurements.
Yes, which I will be releasing results soon. COVID totally sidetracked that one from me.
Well, I look forward to it. I
COVID and Mario Kart.
Really cool. So Megan asks, do you have any tips on knitting a first sweater? I've been reluctant to try because of the risk of it not fitting well or not liking it seems prohibitive given the investment of time and money needed to make a garment, especially for a larger size body.
Yeah. I do have some tips. Start with a top-down sweater and a heavier weight yarn. Honestly, the reason that Ursa was my first design was because it was a bulky weight sweater. And I was like, I'm going to have to reknit this thing a couple times. So what's going to be fastest? You know, a bulky weight sweater, top-down bulky weight sweater is a great first project. Top-down sweater because you can try it on as you go. There are certain styles that I think can be a little bit more forgiving in the fit. A raglan, a top-down raglan that has some ease. Ease is the difference between the fit of your sweater and your body. So like if your bust circumference is 54 and the sweater's circumference is 60, that's 6 inches of positive ease, okay? So picking a sweater that has like, it doesn't have to be oversized, but that has a good amount of ease, and that is top down so you can try it on as you go. So there are some styles, like I wouldn't start with a set-in sleeve, for example, because it really has to fit. It has to fit you in the shoulders. But yeah, top down, a style that's a little bit more forgiving. And like, also I think, okay, I have two things that are going to kind of contradict each other. One of them is that I think desire can be a really powerful motivator for learning. So picking a pattern that you're really excited about might actually be more important than picking a pattern that you think is within your skill set. Because for me, at least, like I learn a lot when I'm forced to learn it. The other thing that I was going to say is like recognize that it's going to be a learning process and you might make something that doesn't fit. And guess what? It's not a waste. You learned something from it. And the next one, there's a higher chance that that one will fit. And that's okay. The cool thing about knitting is that you can frog it. So pick a pattern where you're not steeking. Steeking is when you cut your knitting. Pick a pattern where you're not cutting your yarn so that you can pull it back out pretty easily. And pick a yarn, like, especially if you can go with like an Aran weight wool. That's a really great place to start. And an Aran weight worsted spun wool, you can frog pretty easily, right? If you start with something that's like a lace weight mohair, you're going to have a heck of a time frogging that thing.
Yeah. I've frogged a few things like that. Not very fun. So there actually are, we have just a little bit of more time, everyone. And there's actually a question I want to answer really quickly. Kitty, you asked a question that actually was answered earlier. This will be posted probably by tomorrow on our YouTube channel. So you'll be able to go back and see what she had to say about what Jackie had to say about color choices. So there's a question about how would you describe your aesthetic?
I laughed because I saw that, how would I describe my aesthetic? I have friends who describe it as Hobbit, which I'm okay with. You know, I have been rewatching The Lord of the Rings recently, and you know, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that description. Wearable, I think. I constantly talk about like wanting to have pieces that I live my life in. The way that I mostly dress when I post on Instagram is like how I mostly dress all the time. I like to have pieces that are really wearable. How else would I describe my aesthetic? I like neutrals a lot. I think neutrals can be really powerful, like depending on how you pair them and style them. Yeah, but I also think that mustard is a neutral, so do with that what you will. Yeah, I don't know, my aesthetic. I like fat bodies. I have a lot of art of naked fat bodies in my apartment, which I love. So, yeah.
All right. There's a question about are there fashion sources, like it says fashion magazines that you read. Do you read anything like that for inspiration?
No, there aren't any fashion magazines that I subscribe to. I do love looking at like really beautifully curated and like mindfully styled making publications, right? So Making Magazine, Pom Pom Magazine. I feel really lucky to have like connected with the people who put these beautiful things together. I think that there's, I'm really inspired by the artistry of like a collection. And I think that not all mainstream fashion magazines do that very well, but like a lot of smaller, more indie, especially making community types, right? We'll do that in ways that are really beautiful and inspiring to me. Otherwise, just like a lot of individual cool people on Instagram.
Right. That makes sense to me. There's a couple funny comments. Someone says, my listening in husband just said, neutral hobbit sounds like a Dungeons and Dragons character.
Again, I'm okay with that. I'm good with that.
And lots of people chiming in that mustard is certainly a neutral.
100%, yeah.
And then probably last question for us is, do you have any plans for more sewing patterns?
Oh, yes.
There was also
I'm working on one. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Is the skirt in the book?
The skirt is not in the book. The skirt is self-drafted, and so may become a sewing pattern at some point if there's a lot of interest. Yes, I have lots of plans for more sewing patterns, and plans for more knitting patterns. But like I said, I am excited to focus a lot on styling in the coming months, especially as the book comes out. There will be a make-along for the book. I've loved seeing the test knitters and test sewists. I'm so excited to like see more people and how I love the way that makers own my designs. I feel like it's really, it feels like a creative collaboration to me. It's so cool that like people take my designs and hack them, right? Or like do fun and interesting things with them. And I love that so much. And I've spent like the last couple months, like at its peak, the like the amount of time that I was putting into this book. And I just like, I really want to be able to focus on enjoying that, the styling, and how people like really focus on the makers who have like given me the opportunity to do this, right? And how you all put pieces together. So that really is going to be my focus for the coming months. But yes, of course, I have more plans for sewing patterns and more plans for knitting patterns.
Yay. Oh, I'm going to join you for just a minute. Thank you so much, Jackie, for being here with us tonight. It's just a really wonderful time. And thank you everyone for joining us. We look forward to this every month and look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
I can't wait till I get to be there in person with you.
Me too. Bye, everybody.